DPDP itself is a huge shift in India. We have to take stock that is there any regulatory requirement or any other requirement for me to hold that health record after 10 years? And the simple answer will be no. We like to hoard the data and keep mining it and keep working on it. So that is not the...
It's the most unique thing that's happening across the privacy world. So what do you think of it? What's concern manager to you?
On enforcing these policies, now they are going to check if you're not just having policies, but you're also going to enforce them.
But I don't see a lot of context on AI using sensitive data in DPDPA. Hi and welcome to Compliance Talks by Archon. Following this very insightful discussion with Vasanthika on DPDPA, I thought it would be great to have a conversation on DPDPA itself and how it impacts the tech world, how it impacts, data fiduciaries and how we are going to see DPDPA grow in the next few years. So welcome Vasanthika and looking forward to an exciting conversation.
Thanks Karka for having me here and I'm looking forward to this conversation too. DPDP itself is a huge shift in India. Right. So we only had the Information Technology Act, which did not have any specific requirement per se. And we've only had some regulators like the RBI, SEBI or IRDA or, under medical health having some kind of regulatory requirements. But we have never had something that focused on data protection the way DPDP is. So the main shift that is going to be required, in my opinion, is the first mindset shift. People need to understand that now DPDP is here and it is effective. So they first need to know and understand what is the extent of the impact. And how will you figure that is by trying to map all the personal data that you're going to be collecting, processing, using, storing, entire data lifecycle and transfers and storage, archives, everything.
So Vasanthika, what do you think of, how GDPR is different from DPDPA? Specifically, what I'm thinking is GDPR has strict enforceable retention policies that define, how long you can keep any data. Whereas I feel like DPDPA is more open-ended because it doesn't specifically say how long you retain, personal data or private data. What do you think is different there? Or how do you enforce something that's not clearly defined?
So in GDPR, they've said that you keep the data for the minimum required period. So that comes to the fundamental requirement of any data protection regulation where they talk of data minimization, storage limitation and purpose limitation. So when you talk of storage limitation, we're talking of keeping the data for that period that it is required to. So we'll also see that the way DPDP is structured, it's very clear that it is not intended to override any other law that is prescriptive. So laws like the RBI regulations or say IRDA or health related electronic health records and things like that, or even the SEBI rules, they all will continue to remain and you have to read them in conjunction with the DPDP. So we have to put them together and see that what is the minimum required period based on the laws that apply to your specific business and the specific documentation that we are talking about or the data that we're talking about and apply that minimum period.
See, but I still find a gray area. If you talk about the RBI regulations, SEBI regulations, or, the healthcare record maintenance, all of these laws talk about how much time you have to maintain the data for a minimum period, right? Like you have to at least have this record for so much period of time. In DPDPA, we are talking about purging the data when it's no longer necessary. How would you derive when you need to purge the data based on how long or how much minimum time you need to manage the data? You see the paradox here, right? Yeah. If it is 3 years minimum, I can still say that I'm 9 years and it matches the minimum criteria while there is no need to purge the data itself.
DPDP, we're supposed to take stock of, do you need to hold the data beyond that regulatory minimum? So if your electronic health records, they say 10 years, we have to take stock that is there any regulatory requirement or any other requirement for me to hold that health record after 10 years? Okay. And the simple answer will be no. And therefore, it is time to be able to,
there could be a business need though, right? See, DPDPA clearly says
it
that
is the
if you...
regulatory need, not a business need.
But when I see DPDPA, it talks about how long you necessarily need to maintain the data for your business purpose. So I can legally say my business needs the data for 20 years.
Your business need cannot override a regulatory requirement. In India, our DPDP is very strongly, consent leaning. So you need to have consent. Right. So we cannot say that, okay, people, so I have no choice but to accept most of the terms that are put onto me. And so if someone says that I'm going to hold your data for 20 years, then I should have the right to be able to say that, hey, you don't need it for 20 years. Why do you want it? So therefore, you have to follow the regulatory requirement of keeping the data for as long as you legally need it, and not because, we like to hoard the data and keep mining it and keep working on it. So that is not the driver.
That brings up a very interesting point, on consent managers. If you see on data privacy regulations across the world, the concept of consent manager was officially launched for the first time in India. Correct. And that's very exciting for me because this consent manager makes it very unique. Like, it's the most unique thing that's happening across the privacy world. So what do you think of it? What's consent manager to you?
Yeah, so interestingly, for us in India, consent manager is the concept that we had very similar to the account aggregator under RBI regulations. Yes. So we have just reboxed an existing concept. Yeah. It is different from the data brokers of the US though. Yes. So I think it's a very good concept. Mm-hmm. There are, we already know of maybe 4, 5 people, 6 people who are talking to the authorities, and maybe they will, eventually get notified as consent managers. The most important purpose of this was to avoid or minimize or mitigate the consent fatigue. Mm-hmm. If we have 10, 20, 30 or even hundreds of places where we have given consent, it's hard to keep track, hard to follow up. So you find a third party whose full-time job is to take care of all your consent. So I think it's a very interesting approach and throws up a whole new business for India. And given our size of the economy, maybe it actually makes sense for us to have one.
See, but I see a challenge with it though. Even though the concept of consent manager has been brought in by DPDPA, it is not strictly enforced. It's an optional go-to for organizations if they need to do it, right? But it's not being strictly enforced where, all of the big health data or any of the big data holders should be using consent manager is not clearly specified. So what do you think about that?
I think the rules are yet to come. My estimate or guesstimate is that it will become mandatory.
At some point in time?
At some point. Once there are third-party consent managers, see, the purpose of the consent manager to help the principal. So if me as a principal say that, and you become a consent manager, and I say I'm opening an account with you, I want that my consent manager takes care of all my consent. So all the merchants will have no choice but to work with you, right? It is the right of the principal rather than a...
Right of the vendors.
Right of the vendor or a merchant. So if that is so, I don't know, maybe, I'm overreacting to the thought, but if there are, say, 7 or 10 consent managers, there could be a situation where merchants or the businesses will have to tie up with each of them. Because me as the principal will choose only one. I'm not going to have accounts with all, and I cannot be forced to keep on opening multiple accounts, because that will defeat the very purpose of consent fatigue and all of those. So I'm guessing, but...
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting development, right? We'll have to wait and see how that shapes up.
How it shapes up.
See, one thing about personal data, right? The biggest challenge of managing personal data is with legacy systems, right? Every big organization that has a lot of private, personally identifiable data struggle with managing, personal data in legacy systems. And now with DPDPA, it adds to the risk even more, right? How would you, in your consulting and advisory, what would you talk about with organizations on these legacy systems?
Legacy systems is always a big challenge, and I think it gets more challenging depending on age of organization.
Yes.
And when there are multiple acquisitions, you end up with
Yes.
multiple legacy systems all
Yes.
over, and trying to unify your database is, I think, a huge technology challenge. Legally, it is very easy. I will make a policy and say, hey, adhere to the policy. But the trick is in ensuring that all your systems will talk.
Yep.
And if I say that we need to delete, and maybe they've used a system and then they migrated,
Yep.
and there will be some data that's left behind,
Yep.
and then how do you keep going backwards to find everything? So the trick for that is your data mapping. So now DPDP does not talk of data mapping, but that's your best practice and very important practice for you to know where your data went and where
It resides.
where all it resides.
Yep. Yep. So that's exactly what we specialize in P3. So I'm glad you're bringing it up. The other thing, right, with this legacy data, the challenge of enforcing, data principles. Like DPDPA talks about having a clear direction on how you are managing your data and having guidelines within your organization on the retention policies and purging of data. But one thing that I find very cool to what was happening before, which was also pretty similar, is on enforcing these policies. Now they are going to check if you are not just having policies, but you're also going to enforce them. And as a data auditor, how would they see it? Like, what would an organization need to do to showcase that they are actually enforcing it?
So data audit is again going to be one more new career option,
Yes.
thanks to DPDP. So significant data fiduciaries will have to go through a minimum annual audit.
Yep.
And my understanding is it will be similar to the ISO certification audit. You will have similar approach by auditors. But here the focus will be on your data life cycle and its compliance with DPDP requirements.
Yep.
So when we're talking of storage and have you mapped where all the documents are. So actually now that you talk of the archival system, maybe people who have multiple legacy systems might very well consider a single archival system which will go and gather everything and put it all into one repository and say you got everything in one place, than suffer 10 different archival systems or 10 different legacy systems. That might help them, because then you can implement a uniform classification and retrieval mechanism where you can say that, hey, okay, Vasanthika asked me a question and her data resides in all these places, rather than having to go to 10 different places and search for it.
See, the other thing is about defensible deletion, right? Till DPDPA came into place, defensible deletion and purging of data was never considered mandatory.
Correct.
Now, I feel like that's going to be a big change in how we manage data, and I'm very excited about that. See, one thing you also talked about was significant data fiduciaries.
Yes.
Do you think the government is going to call out and say who are the significant data fiduciaries, or is it up to the organization to identify themselves as significant data fiduciaries?
The way it looks now, I think it's very similar to GDPR. In GDPR, they have not kept a separate term for controller or a significant controller, but all controllers don't require a DPO.
Right.
Those controllers that process higher volume or sensitive data will appoint a DPO. And when we weren't sure, we actually spoke to the authorities to get a clarification to determine whether it was. Now, I don't expect that the DPBI may be giving that kind of an advisory, but maybe we might see some kind of notifications later on. But as of now, it looks like it's similar to self-determination, similar to GDPR, for you to see if this is. Yeah.
See, I would think all of the banks, insurance companies, people dealing with telecom, government data, and anybody who's actually in the retail market could also potentially become a significant data fiduciaries, right?
Yes.
And there could be some gray areas, but that's what makes it very interesting for me, at least, because you have to figure it out. And as the law develops, as the the data privacy board gets established, this is going to become very exciting.
Yeah, certainly. And actually, then even healthcare. We have, so all the, because they're dealing with sensitive information.
Right.
So all of them, and healthcare, there are multiple challenges because somebody will come to one doctor, they will go for a second opinion, and we are not having a system like in the West where you have a primary healthcare and all the data sits in known places. Here your data can be all over. So
exactly.
today you will treat a person, they will not show up, and
See, one other thing that's possibly something we should talk about is India being an IT hub for the world, where we manage and maintain data for not just people of India but across the world, and we run businesses for organizations across the world. How do you think DPDPA is going to impact, let's say, foreign organizations that are keeping foreign data on Indian soil and Indian organizations that process foreign data? How do you think that impacts the cross-boundary movement of data?
so DPDP is only applicable to those who are processing Indian information.
Yes.
So if we are processors for a EU client or a US client, it is only that EU regulation that will apply to that data, or the US regulation, or whichever other country regulation.
that's where I
so
think
DPDP will not affect that.
It's genius, right? Like they have taken significant considerations for companies like us, and
Yes.
that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So you are not going to have to mandatorily force them to also be compliant
Yep.
with DPDP. The processors will just remain processors acting under those instructions of those other regulations.
Absolutely, and that actually is a very helpful gateway, I feel like DPDPA has provided for organizations like us.
Yeah, so it is a assurance to other countries
countries
that they don't have to handle multiple compliances for no reason at
No
all.
reason at all. Yep, exactly. What would you say about DPDPA's impact on, tech organizations? Do you see new business coming into technology, to legal advisories because of this act?
Because of the DPDP, there are, everybody needs to create a data map, data transfer. You need to help with your subject access, know where your data is, then delete it, being able to track. So there are very few players in that field who help with compliance with data protection regulations. There are just a handful. So I think definitely there is a lot of space, and now with AI, people will have AI-driven tools that will just go crawl and create a unique system for each person based on their requirements. Definitely, there is. We are going to see a lot more businesses that will. They will also prepare them at the end for their audit.
Yep.
To ensure that you have everything in place, including your evidential system that can map with a date and time stamp.
But I don't see a lot of context on AI using sensitive data in DPDPA.
There is none.
Yes. So you think that that's going to be coming up in the next few years, or you think how it's going to evolve?
DPDP by itself does not require a special mention of AI, because any technology, any digital personal data needs to follow DPDP, whether it is AI or non-AI or your regular software. It doesn't matter.
See, but there is a big challenge here, right? Even if AI doesn't use your personal data, it can get biased based on the data it gets trained on. So, for example, let's say an AI model trains on only data of South Indians, right? Or people who are identified from South India. Then it can get biased to supporting more on the South Indians than North Indians. And these are things
So that could
create a bias.
Hopefully that is anonymous data. And if it is taken my information without and does not identify it back at me as a data principal, this particular, act of taking my information and using it for training without my personal data identifiers is outside the scope of the DPDP. But if it is using my information and says that Vasanthika is, and takes my data, then obviously the question of consent comes in.
Right.
But the biases are not,
Regulated through DPDPA.
regulated under data protection. That's a separate problem, and we keep hearing of, they are talking of regulations. See, RBI came up with the, 7 sutras. So there are different authorities that are, worried
Looking at it.
about
Yep.
how AI can impact.
Yep.
So that's a separate problem
Yep.
and maybe a separate discussion for another day, a very interesting one too.
Absolutely. These are great feedbacks, Vasanthika. To summarize, right, what I feel is that organizations, DPDPA is going to set organizations in the path where they have to own their data, they have to manage their data better. They'll definitely have to bring in an archival system to manage and bring all their legacy and current data together so that they can actually enforce, not just define policies, but enforce them. And I feel like, as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, the DPDPA regulation itself is going to get more matured with more specific laws that are going to make it more refined. What's your take on this, or how do you see it?
Yeah, I think your point on unifying database is very, very important because that will help them when they are data mapping. Because
yes.
the starting point for any data protection exercise is, of course, after the board determines what is our policy, how are we going to have an approach, is data mapping, understanding where all we are collecting personal data from, where all we store it. So that simplifying your data map will be a great help for every fiduciary and a significant data fiduciary, definitely. So, and documenting that, because if tomorrow you're faced with a simple access request, you have to know where to look. Somebody may be sitting in IT saying that I know where everything is, but the person who's receiving that data request should know where it is. So it is essential to have that documented in place, and any changes immediately should get reflected in that documentation, and being prepared for dealing with data subject requests, your deletion requests, and all of these in a time-bound manner. This
is going to be very important.
Is going to be key and critical.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's all we have for this session, guys. And thanks for listening in, and thanks for the very insightful discussion, Vasanthika. This has been really great, and I hope that we can continue these conversations.
Likewise, I enjoyed it too, Karka. Thanks for having me here.
Shh! Let's talk archival.